First of all, I just wanted to say that I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and I pay respects to elders both past, present and emerging. It's been actually really interesting sitting here. I think I've got a little bit of imposter syndrome myself because I was sitting here thinking, oh my God, I'm not a deep data scientist and things like that. So what I am is I am a storyteller with Microsoft, and I'm also a connector of people. My role is actually officially internally called a global black belt for the workplace intelligence, workplace analytics area. I'm actually also a black belt in Taekwondo too, so I don't just carry that title at work, but in my personal life as well. So what I'm talking to you today is about sort of the journey that we've been on from a Microsoft perspective in our cultural transformation. Those of you who've followed us over the years will be familiar with some of it, and there are many kind of different ways that I can approach this talk, but really what I wanted to talk about was around data and behavioural data that I was just talking about. Where am I pressing this to? There we go. So looking backwards, a little bit about us. So we've been around since 1975. There's a fantastic photo of Bill Gates and Paul Allen there, surrounded by some great computers. And in our early years, we really had a lot of passion for innovation and learning. That's been a part of our DNA for a long time. Our mission back then was to put a PC on every desk and in every home. And in reality, that was kind of through all the drive and all the change and all that innovation, we pretty much reached that goal by about 2000. Around 2000, our second CEO took over. Bill stepped aside to be our chairman, and we started experiencing some growing pains. We kind of got into a position where we were turning into a little bit of a culture of know-it-alls. And I say that that is something that we do talk about and acknowledge out there in the public. It's not just hidden inside. We talk about our background and our history, and we look at how we got there. And for any of you who knows part of our company's history, around that time we started missing some key trends. We started dropping away from our innovation, and we kind of were missing some things that we really should be a part of. From 2014, our third ever CEO, Satya Nadella, in the middle there, took over the organisation and started leading. And for him, this was a time for change and a time to really flip everything on its head about how we were as an organisation. And if you haven't read this book, actually, it's given to every single employee, new starter that starts at Microsoft, and it talks about our culture and our journey that we've gone on with Satya over the time. But really, the key point here is, we'd all like a little hit refresh button to start again. And so this is Satya's journey around that. And as part of that, we came up with our new mission. And that is to empower every person in every organisation on the planet to achieve more. If you ask any single person at Microsoft, we will be able to tell you that. And that's part of the communication that Satya has come down and sent down through his organisation. Everything we do is linked back to this. Everything our senior leadership talks about is linked back to this. Everything my manager talks about is linked back to this. But that is a whole other story. And today I'm really wanting to talk to you more about the data perspective and how we've used data to make that cultural change within the organisation. And the first thing was really about taking a fact, not feel approach. So what we really wanted to do is start to understand more about behaviours within the organisation. What was driving people to behave that way, how we can make that change. And so, as Al was talking about, we started looking at the behaviours and the data there. So we started listening, and I think a majority of people, hands up here, who run sort of an employee survey tool. Yep, majority of the people here. So we started doing that as well. So we started listening, we started looking at sentiment analysis, how long have you been there, what are the overall results, putting that back to our managers. So we looked at it from an organisational perspective, and we still do that. We run, I should be completing my MS poll at the moment. That's being rolled out to the organisation, but we do actually have sort of mini polls throughout the time, and we use that data to look at how the organisation is going. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to take the basics of measuring this employee experience. And if you think about this as an employee's journey over time and how engaged they are as they start, they do an onboarding interview. Yeah, this is great. I'm working for Microsoft. Woo. We come down and, maybe something's happened, and so now we've got an engagement survey, and we can see from that data that, they're a little bit lower down. And we can kind of go through that journey, and then we have an exit interview at the end, right? And so throughout that time, we realised we weren't really hearing everything we needed to hear. And the thing with the employee survey data is it relies on me to sit there and take the time and complete that survey. And it is a point-in-time survey as well of my feelings. So what we wanted to do is we started looking at things like how can we include passively gathered data and bring that to the table and start looking at that. That passively gathered data is part of that Office 365 area. So we're looking at aggregated metadata from things like calendars, from emails, from our team's collaboration through the less structured the less traditional way of communicating through emails to sort of more that collaborative Teams and Channels chat. So as you can see now, that same kind of wave slide here, we can start seeing why these people in the engagement survey start to say, I'm not so happy about being here, or this team, or I'm overloaded. We can start looking at this and saying, all right, so we had lots of one-on-one meetings with our managers. Or, we started having lots of conflicting meetings and I didn't know where to be. I don't have focus time. I really need to do more with less, but I'm not having the time to do anything and to be more innovative. And if you think about where we talked about back in 2000, we started to struggle with being more innovative. So how can we do that? So we looked at workplace analytics, and let me just describe. So workplace intelligence is kind of the umbrella of this whole area, and we have two components under that. My analytics, I'm not sure how many of you utilise my analytics internally. I'm seeing a few nods, which is the individual viewpoint. So I want to see what my focus time might be, what my connections are. And then we've got the workplace analytics side as well, where we start looking at it from an organisational point of view. So internally, we have a lot of different people who are accessing this sort of information. So we've got our HR BI team looking at it for things like manager effectiveness. The more effective the manager, the more sticky the employee is to stay, the more engaged they are, the more high productive they might be. We're looking at onboarding processes. So as people get networked, the quicker they're networked into the organisation, and that is for anyone who's worked with Microsoft or at Microsoft knows that is key number one, is figure out who to know in the organisation. We've got our VPs of engineering looking at sort of the effectiveness of their engineers and if they've got focus time. We've got collaboration overload being done by our department leaders. We've even got our real estate teams who are building a new campus out there, looking at how we can use that collaboration data to really make things more effective in terms of where to position people within the organisation and where to sit people, within the building. So that's really cool. But I'm going to talk you through now with some examples that we went through and how that changed and impacted our organisation. And you're going to have to give me like time check or wave when I'm going over. So we started with a single executive P&L owner. We found that sponsor. I think Audrey was talking about finding that person who will cheer for you and do something. And that person actually was part of the CVP who did acquire volumetrics back then. And what he wanted to do was make his employees, his engineers, more effective. How can we give them some time? So there was this engagement kind of piece of saying, hey, well, look, we're not being able to get the work done. We can't be innovative if we've got fragmented diaries. And you can see here on the left, Monday to Friday, we've got sort of the blocks of time taken, and you can't see sort of a set time of being able to do the work. And research shows if we have time to get into the flow of work, we will be more productive. So what they then did is they did the analysis, they found this out, and they made a change with that. And they said, okay, so internal meetings have to be between Mondays in the morning, Fridays in the morning, and then the rest of the time is left for focus time for you to get into the flow of work, for you to be more productive. And we found that made an impact with the organisation. Now that's just the engineering team, and that was just our initial foray into this area. We do acquire companies. Hopefully now a little bit more successful than sort of back in those 2000 eras. But we also looked at how quickly our acquisitions become networked into the organisation. Are they being isolated? Are they getting networked into the organisation? What's their collaboration patterns are like? The quicker they become more integrated into the organisation, the more successful they are as well. We then got interest from the HR team, and they were like, actually, you know what? This is interesting. And also our sales team as well, thinking, yeah, we might be able to do something with this data, how we can network and collaborate. So from an HR perspective, the more successful employees, the more engaged employees, they're going to be more productive, and those that meet with one-on-one with their managers regularly are more likely to be more productive. So we can start seeing that those that who had more one-on-one hours with their manager were becoming better contributors to the organisation. We also look at it from, and I haven't touched a lot on organisational network analysis, but we do also use that capability fairly deeply, and starting to identify networks and key people bridges within the organisations where we can utilise that to make adoption of technology more successful, for example, identify areas, pockets of ability to create viral uptake of technology as well. But in this particular instance, we talked about the onboarding of employees. And those that had a one-on-one with their manager had a much stronger network within the organisation, and they're more likely to hang around and stay with us. And we're investing a lot of training. Like some of our employees head across to the US for 2 weeks to do some training, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So if we're going to do that, we really want to make sure that they're sticky. And those that collaborated within the team were again more successful. If you contributed to your team's success, it created that impact on that new hire. And we all know that we're looking to not just attract, but we're trying to retain key people within the organisation. If we're spending all this money, we want to make sure that they're engaged. From a sales perspective, this is quite interesting, and we've seen the impact of this hopefully on our bottom line. But we started to look at, okay, so let's look at what an ideal team is. What is our ideal sales team across the organisation? Okay, how do they collaborate? How do they work together? How much time do they spend with their network outside or inside the organisation? Who are they spending that time with? So we started looking at, starting to look at what those ideal performers are, and then started to send that information through our My Analytics platform and said, hey, a great sales team or a great salesperson would look like this. This is what your data says. And it nudges behavioural change within the organisation. So perhaps it might be just putting a few more meetings in the diary with customers, and that would increase then that ability to capitalise on that sale faster. Obviously, the quicker we can close a deal, the quicker we can recognise the revenue, the more successful the organisation can be. From this perspective, we're starting to look more about sort of the customer relationship analytics, and we're starting to get more deeper into sort of putting machine learning on top of it as well. We're starting to bring in our CRM data. We're starting to look at sort of what that ideal collaboration might look like. Where can we spend the most time? So there's a lot of different areas around this, including what's up here, but we're also looking at things like looking at propensity as well. So if this account has a lot more value to us, then we should be spending more time. But what is our sales organisation doing? And in all of this, it's remembering we're not looking at you as a single salesperson, we're looking at the team, we're looking at aggregated data. We also looked at processes as well, and we kind of, in this instance, this was from Canada and a particular a quarterly business review that they were doing. And we started looking at how they did that, how many meetings were happening around that. For example, we'd have a big meeting coming up, and so the direct reports each of them would prepare a lot of information so you could see collaboration happening around that up the organisation chain. Actually, not with us, but one of our customers actually did similar sort of review, and a big aerospace company, the meeting for the CEO, they did an analysis on that, found that every single meeting he had was costing $30 million. He was like, I am not willing to sign off a check for that amount of money, so we need to change things. And so for this, for instance, we looked at our systems. We said, well, can we change behaviours? Can we get people to use the systems more? And that would then drive people to not have to do all this prep work because it's all in the system. We should be able to trust that. What do we need to do with the system? How do we need to change that? And for those of you, probably about October last year, probably saw everything blow up about Microsoft Japan and something they did around their cultural transformation, and this was around meeting efficiency. How many of you sit there in a meeting and email? Yeah. Particularly in the last 15 minutes, how many of you go, right, it's 10, I've got to run to this next meeting, oh God, I've got to, quickly update things. So what we did in Japan, it was slightly different, but it was around that meeting culture, very formal meeting culture, and we looked at how can we improve that. If we reduced our meeting time and we shortened the meetings, we put proper agendas in, we started looking at that, what impact would that have on the organisation? Could we change communication methods as well? Can we utilise Teams more and be more informal? So it's again sort of changed that narrative within the Japanese team. So we have a centre of excellence that's been established within our organisation, and all requests will come through them. So we have people all over the world asking for help in assessing and looking at our behaviours within the organisation and how we can change them for the positive. What we do want to do is make sure it's actionable. Our insights are actionable, and I think Audrey may have mentioned that before. We need to have something. Why put it on the dashboard unless we're going to do something with it? So we ask the question and we make sure that what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to make changes? There's no point in spending the time and the resources, putting all this effort into it for somebody to go, yeah, that's great, thanks. Actually, I was talking to somebody at the last conference I went to, and they said, their culture of analytics is very much like the CEO was, or the head of I think it was a government department actually, the head of the department was sitting there and in the lift, and he mentioned something, and then 4 weeks worth of stuff went behind the scenes, and they gathered all this information and presented it back, and went, okay, thanks. You're just kind of like, what did I do that for? So it's really important for us to know what we're actually going to do with that information. And I wanted to include this as I start to wrap up is really, the way people work will drive the success. So there's a McKinsey study that goes on and has analysed, I think, over 5 million data points, and it assesses a organisational health number to an organisation, depending on sort of how people work together, how they collaborate. And it shows that those that have a higher health index are actually much more have much bigger impact, say on the share price, for example. So good. I think I've got some slide building here that I wasn't expecting. There we go. All right. So you can see here, so since Satya took over, you can see what's happened to our share price. So obviously we've had some impact. We're looking at the way that our culture and our behaviours are happening within the organisation. So look, I've been with Microsoft for 2 years now, and I celebrated 2 years at Microsoft last week. And I think one of my tweets out there was, I found home. The values and the culture of the organisation very much match mine, and I'm very much that type of person that will do anything if the culture is right. I will dig in, I will go hard, I will work together with my teammates, and that's the culture that Satya has created, and that's obviously making an impact out there for our shareholders. The last piece I wanted to talk about was it's very important from a Microsoft perspective. We do say Microsoft runs on trust, and we're very, very aware of that with our customer data and with our own. And what I wanted to leave you finally with is just around what we do. You know, when we bring on projects, or when we bring projects into the team and start looking at this, we really want to make sure, you know, what's the impact? What are you going to do with all the data? All of those questions. But the last one is, what impact is it going to have on the employee? We want to make sure that they have an employee experience, that, you know, we're not afraid of what we're doing with that. So we make sure that we communicate with our employees what the value it is to them of what we're doing. So we're upfront and we're honest. We're not doing anything secretively. Ugh, now my mouth's all dry. But basically what we're looking for is people analytics for good, and making sure it's that way. So thank you all for letting me share the Microsoft story, and thank you.